Hey everyone! Welcome to The Young and the Restless. I'm Jane, and I'm so excited to have you here. If you love Young and the Restless, then you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Alright, let's dive right in. According to The Young and the Restless recap on Friday, August 1st, Daniel Romalotti Jr. state with Tessa Porter is ruined, and Diane Jenkins Abbott will issue Phyllis Summers a backstabber warning. After a missed playdate, Tessa will have a hard time figuring out what Aria Porter Copeland wants in the park in Friday's YNR episode. When Tessa runs out of fish crackers, Daniel will show up and save her by bringing her some fish gummies. Tessa will learn how to locate animals in the skies from Daniel, who will also be able to put Aria to sleep. Tessa will be looking forward to Daniel's guitar lesson as a diversion after she opens out about essentially being a single mother because Mariah Copeland has been so aloof. Before abruptly clarifying that he doesn't mean a date, Daniel would imply that it's a date. Diane will encounter Phyllis at Crimson Lights, who will highlight her partnership with Kane Ashby while remaining vague about it. Diane will act as though it is understandable that Phyllis is getting into bed with Kane because she is irritated and suggests that they are similar. Diane would eventually walk off after hinting that Phyllis might be the next to be stabbed in the back. Tessa, Aria, and Daniel will run into Phyllis once they arrive at the coffee shop. In order to give Daniel an opportunity to catch up with Phyllis after all the turmoil in Nice, Tessa will choose to postpone their guitar lesson. Tessa will discover she neglected to pack toys to divert Aria from her nap after Daniel and Phyllis depart together. Tessa will be concerned about Aria's impending tantrum, but Diane will provide some of Harrison Abbott's crayons from her purse along with a motivational speech. Billy Abbott will advise Jack to terminate their business relationship in the Abbott mansion, and he will inquire as to if Jack is prepared to relinquish his stake in Abbott Communications. Jack will discuss calling Kane to discuss a deal for them and will be willing to give up his shares. Billy will worry about a catch and be shocked at how readily Jack is agreeing to this, but Jack will appear more worried about Kane being such a wild card. In spite of all the worries, Billy will want to take a chance on Kane in return because he will value Kane's willingness to wager on him. Diane will bring up the fact that Jack stated he would be prepared to support Kane if it meant assisting Kyle Abbott in dealing with Victor Newman when they next meet, and he provides updates. Even though Jack will admit that he would make a bargain with the devil to deceive Victor, he will still worry about Kane taking advantage of him and placing Billy in a precarious situation. Phyllis will inform Daniel at Society that Kane is actually Aristotle Dumas and that he intends to seize control of all the significant businesses in Genoa City. Phyllis will insist that she will assist Kane and will make hints regarding Billy's involvement, even though she won't be able to divulge into specifics. Billy will show up close by and act as though they should disregard Daniel's request that Phyllis use cautious. There will be some discussion on how GC's power dynamics are going to drastically shift. According to teasers for The Young and the Restless, Kane's return to Genoa City will cause a stir in the upcoming episodes, so keep an eye out. Diane Jenkins had spent the entire morning observing Phyllis Summers hovering around the Grand Phoenix lobby like a restless hawk searching for prey, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. After decades of circling the same deceptive chessboard with Phyllis, Diane knew better than to assume that the nervous hitch in her smile and the false lightness in her voice meant nothing. Phyllis's energy had changed recently. Diane had always been adept at seeing warning signals, but this tense truce between them had been simmering for weeks. And today, treachery was evident in every sign. Diane didn't have to wait until the knife was in her back to speak up. Phyllis was plotting something, and she wasn't just dreaming. As Phyllis took a coffee and headed for the elevator, Diane noticed an opening and stopped her like a snake snagging grass. "Phyllis," she remarked with ease, the warning concealed like poison beneath silk in her grin. Phyllis paused, tensing up a little, then turned. With a mock sweetness that avoided touching her eyes, she answered, "Diane. To whom do I owe this enjoyment?" Diane narrowed her eyes and cocked her head. "I simply wanted to bring something to your attention." Phyllis gasped, taken aback by the candor. You have a long, legendary history of backstabbing the people around you, and while that used to be your charm, now it just makes you predictable. Is that a warning? Diane lowered her voice and took a step closer. No, it's a favor. Avoid the blunder of believing that this game is exclusive to you. For a moment, Phyllis's countenance cracked. Fear? I've been where you are, anxious to make a difference, to take back control, to prove I'm not irrelevant, and I'm telling you, Phyllis, it always ends in flames. Feeling guilty? But it vanished as quickly, to be replaced by the fragile self-assurance she carried like armor. Diane grinned, aware that she had touched a chord, and said, "You have no idea what you're talking about. I am aware that you have been looking through the Abbott files once more. I'm not distracted by Kyle's problems, but Jack might be. And you're dreaming if you believe you can make up a tale to have him oppose me once more," Phyllis said, rolling her eyes. Please. Diane, you're so self-centered. Not everything is about you. However, Diane could see that she was betrayed by the tremor in her voice. Diane stepped past Phyllis and muttered, "Remember, sometimes the backstabber ends up bleeding the most." The elevator dinged as Phyllis stood motionless, but she made no attempt to board. Daniel Romolotti had just pulled out a chair for Tessa Porter at a small, quiet Italian cafe nestled between two art galleries in a much more tranquil area of Genoa City. For once, Daniel appeared at ease as the sun had already set, bathing the cobblestone streets in a warm golden glow. There was no sign of Tessa's typical reserve when she smiled at Daniel. She was wearing a delicate blue blouse that glinted in the breeze and made her eyes glitter. Tonight was about re-establishing contact, not about business or pressure. Something had sparked between the two ever since they worked together on Mariah's most recent charity event. There was an unquestionable ease and understanding between them, even though they weren't initially romantically involved. After all, Tessa had gone through a whirlwind of pain and recovery since Noah departed again. With Heather becoming more aloof in Portugal, Daniel had been attempting to emerge from his father's shadow once more. And now that she was concentrating on music production rather than touring, Tessa was unsure about what to do next. Tessa had surprised them both by agreeing when Daniel casually suggested they go out to supper sometime. Here they were now, enjoying wine and reminiscing about their pasts. As Daniel proudly displayed a picture on his phone and told her about Lucy's most recent sketch, Tessa chuckled and related a strange tale about her first open mic performance, in which an inebriated groomsman thought she was the bride. Their sincere and light laughing filled the air, and for a little period, neither of their burdens felt as heavy. Daniel leaned in with genuine interest rather than flirtation. "Do you ever consider recording once more?" he inquired. Tessa gave a shrug. "Occasionally. However, I'm not sure if I'll be able to return to my former self." Daniel nodded slowly, although he was unsure of who that was. "You might not be allowed to." Tessa gazed at him, affected by the idea that perhaps this version of you, the one who has seen more, experienced more, and endured more, is the one worth hearing. "Daniel, you never cease to amaze me." He laughed. She smiled and said, hopefully in a good way. "Mostly." They clinked their glasses, but neither of them saw the person across the street, Tessa's sister Crystal, who had just returned to town and wasn't sure if she should interrupt. Diane, meanwhile, was lost in thought back at society. It had been important, but hard, to face Phyllis. She was aware that Phyllis was a fierce, obstinate, and erratic lady who wouldn't give up lightly. Diane was more concerned about what Phyllis might be prepared to risk this time. Diane had put up a fierce fight to restore her reputation and win back Jack and Kyle's trust. The scars from the past were at least covered, even though they hadn't completely healed. However, if Phyllis makes a mistake or accuses you or manipulates you, the fractures might reopen. She was aware that Jack was still at risk in Phyllis's eyes. She was usually in his blind spot. Jack's focus was now dispersed as Kyle spiraled over the fallout with Audra and Harrison gone with Summer. For the sake of her family as well as herself, Diane needed to stay ahead of the storm. A text message from Jack buzzed through her phone. "Is everything all right?" After a moment of hesitation, she answered, "Just the typical dance. We'll chat later." Daniel and Tessa were strolling leisurely along the Chancellor Park edge across town, their dinner forgotten as the stars started to shine. Daniel looked over, his hands in his pockets. "Can I ask you a question without coming off as strange?" Tessa grinned. "You may inquire. If it's strange, I'll let you know." He chuckled. "Do you ever believe that people like us, those who have erred greatly and unintentionally injured others, get to be happy? Like, truly joyful?" After a brief period of silence, Tessa said quietly, "I think we get to try. That's all we can do, I believe." Daniel nodded thoughtfully, "And if we try with the right people, maybe we get close." "You seem like one of the right people," Tessa said, pausing her stride and turning to face him. "Are you not attempting to date me?" She smiled teasingly as she asked. He chuckled once more before shaking his head, saying, "Because that would definitely be weird." "No. No pressure, I mean. But I'm here if you ever need someone who understands." Her smile grew softer. "Daniel, thank you. That matters more than you realize." At that moment, Crystal emerged from the shadows and called softly, "Tessa?" Her sister turned, astonished yet happy. "Crystal! Why are you here?" Crystal approached and gave her a firm embrace. "I've spent days attempting to get in touch with you." Tessa's expression darkened with worry. "I think something's happening with Mom." "What are you saying?" Crystal looked at Daniel, who took a polite step back. "She suggested that we speak in a quiet setting." Daniel watched them leave with a weird sensation in his chest that was more like worry than jealousy. Even though it was a tranquil night, Genoa City had a way of turning quiet moments into storm warnings, and this one felt like the eye of something approaching. When Phyllis eventually entered the elevator at the Grand Phoenix, her hand was a little shaken. She was unsettled by Diane's remarks because they were too accurate, not because they were incorrect. She had been searching the Abbott archives once more, and she had come perilously close to stepping over a boundary she had vowed never to cross. But everything in her told her that it was justified. Phyllis knew that if she waited too long, she would lose whatever advantage she had, and Diane couldn't be trusted, not really. Survival in this town was the edge. She silently asked herself, as the doors closed, "How far am I really willing to go this time?" as she gazed at her reflection in the chrome panel. The answer frightened her deep inside. However, her desperation and pride overpowered her anxiety. She would find her path somewhere between justice and revenge. However, there were casualties. Not without a price. As night fell on Genoa City, the streets murmured of past transgressions, the stars above glistened with secrets, and in the city's quieter nooks, hearts were opened, alliances were broken, and decisions were made that would reverberate long after the last warnings had been given and the wine glasses had been cleared. Every fiber of Diane Jenkins's being was screaming that something wasn't right at the moment, and she had always been a woman who trusted her gut. She had observed Phyllis Summers's recent behavior, which was too kind, too accommodating, and excessively curious about the inner workings of Newman Enterprises. Diane was certain it was a front. Diane wasn't going to lower her defenses just because Phyllis had suddenly chosen to be kind because she had a history of playing both sides. The previous time that Phyllis had acted as an ally, she had skillfully planned Diane's demise, shattering her relationships and ruining her reputation. Diane refused to allow the past to happen again. She wasn't going to allow Phyllis to waltz in and ruin everything she had fought so hard to restore her life and regain the trust of those she loved. The whispered discussions, the newfound interest in Diane's business transactions, and the way Phyllis always seemed to be hiding in the background whenever Diane was making a move were all warning indicators. Everything was too planned, too calculated. Diane understood she needed to move quickly. It would be too late by the time Phyllis made her move, so she couldn't afford to wait. To ensure that people closest to her saw Phyllis for what she really was, a skilled manipulator with a propensity for treachery, she had to issue a warning. Tessa Porter and Daniel Romalotti were getting ready for their much-anticipated date across town. For months, the two had been circling their emotions in a push-and-pull dynamic that left them both feeling irritated and yearning for more. Tessa's unbridled skill, her free personality, and her imaginative and passionate outlook on the world had always captivated Daniel. However, external factors such as prior relationships, familial expectations, and the ongoing scrutiny of living in a town where everyone knew each other's business had complicated their connection. But Daniel was resolved to ignore all of that tonight. To demonstrate to Tessa that he was sincere about repairing their relationship, he wanted to put all of his attention on her. Everything had been carefully planned by him, a peaceful supper at their favorite restaurant, followed by a stroll along the shore where they could converse without being interrupted. He wanted to show Tessa that he was different because he knew she had been harmed in the past and that she was scarred by relationships that had promised more than they had delivered. He had no intention of playing games or making excuses. Whatever that meant for them, he was prepared to move forward. For her part, Tessa was just as anxious about the night. There was something about Daniel that made her want to try, but she had been burnt too many times to trust the concept of love. He never attempted to modify her, even though he was grounded where she was flighty and stable where she was impetuous. It was uncommon in her environment for someone to accept her for who she was, imperfections and all. She was still afraid that this was all too good to be true, though. What would happen if she fell in love with him and everything fell apart? What if they were hampered by the demands of their families, jobs, or histories? She was afraid to give her heart to anyone, even someone as sincere and compassionate as Daniel, because she had spent so much of her life guarding it. However, she made a secret vow to herself as she prepared for their date by putting on the clothing she knew he adored and wearing just enough makeup to accentuate her features without coming across as overly forced. She would really try this. She would no longer allow fear to control her decisions. She was prepared to take the chance if Daniel was. Diane was completing her strategy to reveal Phyllis's actual motivations back at the Newman Enterprises office. She was aware that Phyllis was too crafty and well-connected for her to succeed alone. She required allies, people who had personally witnessed Phyllis's darker side. Her first call was to Jack Abbott. Diane knew he wouldn't disregard a valid warning, even if he had a soft spot for Phyllis and had been hurt by her more times than he wanted to acknowledge. In order to avoid being overheard, she picked a quiet area of the Grand Phoenix to meet him. She started cautiously, saying, "I know you have a history with Phyllis, but I need you to listen to me. I'm not just being paranoid, she's planning something. I've witnessed how she's been researching things and how she's suddenly everywhere I go." Jack leaned back in his chair, his face impassive. "She's planning something, Jack, and if we don't act now, it's going to blow up in our faces." He knew Phyllis had been making an effort to change her ways, but he had also learned the hard way not to discount Diane's intuition. "Do you have evidence?" His voice was quiet as he inquired. Diane paused. As of yet, she lacked hard evidence. However, she had witnessed enough to know that Phyllis remained the same. She said, "Not yet, but I will. And I need to know you'll be there for me when I do." Jack sighed and rubbed his temples. "I'll keep a watch on things," he responded at last. "But watch out, Diane." Diane nodded. "Phyllis won't go down without a fight if she finds out you're on her." She was aware of the dangers. However, she was also aware that there was no way to do nothing. Daniel brought a bunch of wildflowers to Tessa's house as the sun started to drop. They reminded him of her, wild and colorful, and he had picked them out. His breath froze in his throat as she opened the door. With her hair cascading in free curls about her shoulders and her eyes glistening with a mixture of apprehension and excitement, she looked lovely. You look amazing, he murmured as he gave her the bouquet. Tucking a lock of hair behind her ear, Tessa grinned. She taunted, "You're not so bad yourself," but her intense stare revealed her actual emotions. There was a noticeable tension between them, a mixture of unspoken feelings and anticipation. Daniel put his fingers through hers and grabbed for her hand. "All set?" he inquired. With a nod, Tessa gave his hand a light squeeze. All set. Daniel had hoped that the restaurant would be cozy, dimly lit, and noisy enough to provide solitude without making them feel alone. Their conversation flowed naturally from music to travel to their future aspirations. Tessa felt as though she could finally let her guard down for the first time in a long time. No one else ever had the ability to make her feel seen and understood the way Daniel did. He touched her with his fingers when he reached across the table halfway through dinner. He whispered, "I understand that we've taken our time, and I appreciate that, Tessa. But I must express my feelings to you. You have my undying love. For a long time, I have been." Tessa's heart pounded. Naturally, she had known, but hearing the words spoken gave it a reality she wasn't expecting. She started to reply, but the words stuck in her throat. Daniel gave her the space she required by waiting with his eyes fixed on hers. At last, she inhaled deeply. "I'm afraid," she said. Daniel nodded and said, "I've been hurt before, and the notion of going through it again. I understand. I also cannot guarantee that we won't encounter difficulties. However, I can assure you that I will never purposefully harm you. Tessa, I want this. I desire us